So welcome everybody. This is the Middleton Place Foundation Speaker Series, and joining us this evening are Sydney Frazier, our Vice President of Horticulture, and Charles Williams, who has a wonderful presentation lined up for us, and I am going to ask Sydney to start us off.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm delightful that all of you are able to join us tonight to hear this wonderful lecture by Charlie. He is an awesome speaker. I have heard him on several occasions. And on behalf of the Middleton Place Foundation, we definitely want to thank all of you for being big supporters of the foundation. It's really awesome to have friends out there in the community. And also, our President and CEO, Tracy Todd, cannot be here tonight, but if he was here, he would say the exact same word. Thank you so much, all of you. You know, tonight is going to be a special night, and I have already started reading Charlie's book, and I can't wait to hear his talk tonight. Just to think about the fact that Middleton Place is a 501c3, and this garden was started in 1741, and here we are tonight. Charlie's going to be talking about Andre Michaux, who was, you know, the garden 5 years before he was birthed into the world. That is awesome. So thank you so much for being a part of this lecture series tonight. And we greatly, greatly, greatly thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here, Sydney. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Everybody, in case you did not know, we are able to present this virtual speaker series programming for free thanks to a grant from South Carolina Humanities. And so we're really grateful. This is the third of 3 different virtual speaker series presentations that we have done. And the great news is we have more planned for the spring. So we hope that you have been enjoying this series. We are delighted to close it out with Charlie, and we'll be back in the spring. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention before I introduce our speaker. The first being, again, about that chat window. You can talk to all the panelists, or you can talk to individual panelists in there. We are opening up for questions. If you hover down at the bottom of your Zoom window, you should be able to see a function that says Q&A. And if you have a question for Charlie at any time during the presentation, I urge you to click on the Q&A, write a question, and submit it. I will be receiving all of those, and then Charlie will answer them at the end of the presentation. So please put all your questions there, and we'll get to them. It's a great way to keep them focused. If you put your questions in the chat window, they may scroll by. I might not see them. So please, 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 if you can, use the Q&A function, and we will answer your questions after the presentation. Finally, if you'd like to order Charles's book, I have a link for you. You can purchase it right here online from the shop at Middleton Place. This is brand new, hot off the presses. Charlie, when was this released?
31 March 2020.
31 March. Love it. So it's brand
The day
new.
before April Fool's Day.
But it's no joke. It's there. It's
No
real.
It's 15 years to the day after I retired to do this.
Oh, there you go. So if you all click into the chat window, I have just put a link into the chat window. And if you click it, it will take you right to our brand new Middleton Place online store where you can purchase this. We'll ship it to you, or you can pick it up from Middleton Place. So there's the link right there. I'll send it out again. And last but not least, and I'm going to say this again at the end because we're so excited, it is a garden-focused week here at Middleton Place because on Thursday, Plugged Into History is returning. We're coming back to Facebook Live at 11 a.m. on Thursday, October 1st with none other than our very own Vice President Horticulture, Sydney Frazier. He's going to be talking to you all about fall planting. So tune in on Facebook at 11 a.m. If you can't catch the live, that's okay. Visit our Facebook page whenever is convenient for you after that. The recording will still be there, so you'll still get a chance to tune in. Okay, so without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Charlie Williams. Most of you, I have a sneaking suspicion, know a little bit about him, if not know him personally. But for those of you who don't, Charlie and his wife of 46 years are both retired from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, and they do make their home up there in Charlotte, North Carolina. But Charlie's family roots run deep. They run deep here in South Carolina, dating back before the Revolution. He has a bachelor's degree from Wake Forest College and a master's from Florida State University, and he is a veteran of the United States Navy. Thank you for your service. And as Charlie just mentioned, he has been working on his Michaux book for a while. So I'm not going to steal the thunder of that, but you should know some specific things. He's been presenting about Michaux for a long time. He was the principal organizer and chairman of a Michaux celebration held at Daniel Stowe Botanical Garden, Belmont Abbey College, and Gaston Day School in 2002. As well as the OCONEE Bell celebration at Clemson and at Devil's Fork State Park in 2007. He's published numerous articles on Michaux, and in 2014, he was able to guide a descendant of Michaux's family on a tour of sites in the Carolinas and Tennessee that the botanist himself had visited. So there is so much background here. And one more thing, probably my favorite little trivia tidbit, Charlie has made presentations on Michaux for audiences as André Michaux, that first person 18th century interpretation, André Michaux live. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out at Middleton Place, because we know that you were here, Charlie, and that you gave us that presentation, don't worry, folks, because this virtual thing is only temporary. So we intend to have Charlie back soon, and hopefully to give that very presentation again in our brand new pavilion. And so we're just so excited to have you here. There is no other person who could be the foremost expert on André Michaux other than you, Charlie. So thank you so much. I am going to mute myself and Sid now, and you can take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Karen. Let me bring up my PowerPoint screen. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Not yet. Don't forget to hover down there on the share screen and click that.
Uh-oh, I didn't do that. Let me go back and do again. Big window here. So let me do share screen. It's good that I have you here to keep me out of.
Tech support is what I'm here for, no worries.
Now, let's see, it gave me another little window that said host has disabled attendees.
Oh, that's my fault. Sorry. Try again.
Okay, let me do okay.
Sorry, I just enabled it. Try again.
Okay, is it okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's see. Hit share, but I can't get.
You do have the capability now. So if you go back down to the bottom of your Zoom panel to that green button, share screen, and just click it, it should work for you now.
A nice big white screen with a lot of other options came up for me. And one of the things that is a little thing at the bottom that says share. And I've got PowerPoint. So I'm going to hit share.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. And drag.
And now bring your PowerPoint window forward.
Yeah, and pull this over here.
Perfect.
And maximize the PowerPoint.
There we are.
Okay.
Except that's the last slide.
Uh-oh.
Thanks for coming, everybody. No, I'm kidding.
Well, let's see what I do here.
I'm joking. You can just go to the beginning again.
Oh, I see what happened. I moved the mouse. Oh, my goodness.
Click on that first one.
Sorry, folks. You know, I'm sort of half the time I'm an 18th century character, and it did it again.
So go back again.
Okay.
Yep, end the show. Oh, there you go. Go to slide number 1. Perfect.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, we've got something up here that I want to have up here. And this is just up so that you can see this is the kind of thing that Michaux was looking for in his life, not money, but recognition. When he named a plant, his name will be after that plant in every formal, plant book. So anyway, let me go forward and actually begin the show, but you should be able to read some of this print, or some things in this show are not going to show up very much for you. You know, it's really different for me not to be wearing a hat when I do a presentation. So I've got my three-cornered hat here behind me. But I'm really pleased we could all gather online here to talk about Andre Michaux in North America, Journals and Letters, 1785, 1797. And it took three of us to do this. So all this stuff about me, this is a group effort. Now, what I hope to cover tonight is to tell you a little bit about who Michaux was, a little bit about his work in America. I want to introduce my colleagues and our principal helpers in this endeavor. I want to describe the contents of the book in a very general way, and I want to show you some examples of the manuscript material that we used. And I also, this is just a favorite thing I like to do, I want to share the highlights of the fascinating story of the OCONEE bell, plant named Shortia GALACIFOLIA. That's the story that only appears in the end notes in our book because most of it happened after Michaux's death. And last, I'd like to locate and describe Michaux's 2 American gardens. Now, sadly, let's get this out of the way. There are no known illustrations, paintings, drawings of any kind that have been made of Andre Michaux of his lifetime. None of them have ever been found, if any were made. So if you find something on the internet, save sending me an email. I get plenty of those anyway. What you're finding is something that's either based on one of the images of his son, because there are several images of his son, or it's something somebody just dreamed up. Now this one was dreamed up, but I really like it. This was done by a lady named Jenny Noseworthy. It's done for the Tipton Haynes Historic Site over in Johnson City, Tennessee. And I think this is a very insightful drawing. If you will notice, she's got you looking over his right shoulder. So you can't really make out those facial features. But what you can see is that this is a man with very powerful, well-developed calf muscles. And I think Andre Michaux, a man who walked thousands of miles over the roughest territory, not just in America, but in the world, he had powerful calf muscles. Now, Michaux came here on an official mission. He was sponsored by his government. He was the King of France's botanist in North America. He met those men that we call the founding fathers. Michaux dined at Mount Vernon with George Washington. He was bringing him gifts from the King of France. He also met Franklin and Jefferson and others. And in Charleston, he met members of those leading families, like the Pinckneys, the Draytons, and yes, of course, the Middletons. Those men made him, and later made his son, members of the Agricultural Society of Charleston. This was a very elite organization that included the wealthiest and most powerful men in the state. The one of our founding fathers who had the most interactions with Michaux was Thomas Jefferson. In 1793, now, that is 10 years before the Lewis and Clark expedition. The territory that became the Louisiana Purchase was then part of the Spanish Empire. But Thomas Jefferson, who was then not president, but Secretary of State in the Washington administration, put together a plan to sponsor Andre Michaux on a privately financed expedition up the Missouri River, over the Rocky Mountains, and on to the Pacific Ocean. These few lines here at the top are in Jefferson's own handwriting. He drafted this document to raise the money for that expedition privately. Now, I'm not showing you that part, but Washington and 3 future US presidents signed that document. It's called the Exploration of the West document. It's up at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. And it is the only document that those first 4 presidents signed that still survives today. Now, here's the cover of our book. And since the heart of it is a translation of Michaux's writings, it's considered a book authored by Michaux, and we are considered editors. Now that's fair. We worked very hard to allow him to tell his own story. But our annotations explain what lies beneath his often brief notes. The first reviewer of our manuscript, the historian Catherine Holland Braun over at Auburn University, she observed with humor and accuracy that Andre Michaux would be better known today if he had not had the misfortune to write in French. Now, the illustrations on the cover are from the book, and they're not only pretty, they're actually informative. Here in the upper left-hand corner, you have the yellowwood tree, a very important discovery that Michaux made in Tennessee that actually has its own historical marker. In the upper right, you have a little clip from his journal where he is recording notes about his climb of Grandfather Mountain up in North Carolina. Michaux was the first person of note to climb Grandfather Mountain. And he arrived at the top on a clear day, and he was just overcome. He thought that he had just arrived at the highest mountain in North America. And what he did was sing the new French national anthem, La Marseillaise, from the summit. Now, the lower right, if you're looking at that, I hope you can make it out. It's very difficult on this scale. But this is a map of New York and New Jersey. This is Michaux's own map, and it shows the area where his first garden was. He had it over in New Jersey, just across the river from New York. And New York was a tiny little blot at the end of Manhattan Island at that point. Now, down here on the right, that pretty little pink flower, that is a plant that Michaux named for Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. That is a picture of Pinckneyia, the plant that I showed you a little botanical description of as we started. It's a very rare tree today. Now, a leading historian of science wrote her forward, and he locates Michaux within the larger story of plant exploration. Michaux is only one of many plant explorers, but he's one of ours. He came to America. Now, as I said, the text is Michaux's narrative. It's been translated into English and much of it has been translated for the very first time in our book. Our appendices provide equivalent modern plant and animal names for the old names that Michaux used. And we also have photographs of 100 plants that Michaux encountered. Our endnotes identify most of the people he met, whether they were famous or not. If it's your fifth great-grandfather, why would you care if he's famous? We also add other details, and we provide additional scientific information. We have 16 maps. This is to help readers visualize the areas he visited, and we have 38 other illustrations, including 10 illustrations of people he worked with in France and in America, and there are 2 paintings of his son. The result is a 608-page book. It's printed on heavy paper. I think it will last for centuries. The hardcover weighs more than 5 pounds. Now, this is the very first annotated translation of all of Michaux's North American journals. And I want you to know that the journals have been in America for 196 years. But no one person ever combined the skills, interest, and training needed to translate and annotate them. So this book is a team effort. We combined our skills and pooled our enthusiasm to see this project completed and published. Now, on the left is Walter Taylor, Professor Emeritus of Biology at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Walter's written and published several books. He began his work on this project with a study and analysis of Michaux's herbarium, which was on microfilm. That means he studied 3,000 images that had to be examined using a low-power microscope. In the center is Elaine Norman, Elian Norman. Forgive me, Elian, I know you're probably listening. I slipped up. I have mistyped it on my notes here. Elian is Professor Emerita of Biology at Stetson University in DeLand, Florida. She's the author of a scholarly book on the butterfly bushes of the Western Hemisphere. Elian was born in France, and she spoke French at home until she was 21. Elian's story is amazing. Her mother brought Elian and her brother to America as children in 1942 to escape the Nazis. Now, Elian earned her PhD degree from Cornell University that same year that I obtained my high school diploma in Lancaster County. Now, I'm on the left, and I trace the beginnings of my learning about Michaux to my master's program at Florida State, where my very favorite professor described to the class her own interest in translating the unknown journals of Michaux. I've realized her dream. This is Walter's best-known book. It is now in its 2nd edition. Now, Walter and Elian worked together for several years on a 246-page book about Michaux's 3-month-long journey in Florida. And here they are at a book signing at Belmont Abbey College during the 2002 Michaux celebration. My obsession for several years was to reprint and annotate the original life story of Michaux, written by a colleague who knew him and worked with him in Paris. And it had originally been published in the early 1800s, and it's the paperback book on the right here. Professor Emeritus Jim McClellan of Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey wrote our foreword. If you don't know about Stevens Institute of Technology, think Caltech on the Hudson. They don't have a football team, I don't think. but they don't need one. Jim's authored textbooks on the history of science, but his crowning achievement is this book pictured on the right. His chapter on Michaux is masterful. It's a shame that the only university library in South Carolina that appears to own this book is the College of Charleston. But thank goodness they have it. Some of you have met Régis Pluchet. He's a member of the Michaux family, and he's standing next to Elion here in Charleston a few years ago. Régis is a retired French journalist who published a book on Michaux's travels in the Middle East and a few magazine articles and a couple of scholarly journal papers. He is a thorough and careful researcher in French archives, and he helped us a great deal with this book. Speaking of books, Michaux's major work is his Flora Borealis Americana. It's shown on the left here. It's a descriptive list of the plants of Eastern North America, and it is written in Latin. It's for the scholars and other well-educated persons of his time. Now, André Michaux's special interest was in trees, and his son followed in his footsteps. He soon published the first illustrated book about American trees, the 3-volume North American Silva that's on the right here. It's aimed at general audiences, and it was published in both French and English editions. And I believe that Henry Middleton was Francois Michaux's agent in Charleston for these books. They were very good friends. Pierre J. Redoute. He's sometimes called the Raphael of flowers. He illustrated the books of both André Michaux and his son, Francois André. The illustrations dramatically increased the value of Michaux's books as collector's items. Redoute is better known today than any of the botanists whose books he illustrated. And he's particularly celebrated for his 2 books sponsored by the Empress Josephine. One is named The Lilies, and the other one is named The Roses. Now, I said I wanted you to see what the manuscript copies of the journal would look like, and here it is on the left. Now, the journal is actually half the size of this page on the right. That is a letter. In each case, these are his first writings from Charleston. His handwriting is very legible. And usually the documents are in very good condition. These, of course, have been microfilmed, then printed, and then scanned for this program. So they're a little bit fuzzy, but they're really in very, very good condition. Now, the journal also has a transcription that was published in 1889. It has to be used with care because there are little errors in it. But again, it is a transcription in the original French. It is not a translation. On the screen now is an excerpt from a long letter that has been unknown until we put it in our book. Now, this is proof that Michaux's letters in archives have yet to give up their secrets. I hope you can read this list of Latin names on your screens. This letter was written from America, and this list of plants is what Michaux wants shipped to him so that he can, as you see up at the top, he wants to multiply them in America. Now, we reproduced and analyzed key portions of this letter. The whole thing was 9 pages long, but we analyzed key parts of it in our book. Those asterisks by 5 of the plants are Michaux's asterisks. They had to be obtained from a special nursery in the Paris area, and he had those purchased from his own personal account. The red underlining I've added because I wanted you to notice those particular things, and I am not able to use a laser pointer here. Most people who are interested in plants would know the mimosa. They would certainly know the Camellia japonica. They would know the ginkgo. But you might ask, legitimately, what is Tia viridis? Well, now, a few years ago, it required specialized knowledge to find that out. But now, if you just Google it, you'll very quickly learn that it is Camellia sinensis, the tea plant. A few of you will also know that Michaux gave Charles Drayton several plants, including one that he identified as a green tea plant. Well, guess what? Viridis is the Latin word for green. So I think that Michaux gave Charles Drayton a tea plant. Now, Francois-André Michaux wrote about the wonderful ginkgos that he found growing in his father's garden when he came to Charleston in 1800. Michaux gave the mimosa to his friends the Bartrams in Philadelphia, and it has spread everywhere, and not in a good way. So plants on this list clearly made it to his gardens. My question is, why has the idea that Michaux had Camellia japonica been so difficult for some to believe? I tell you, there's more about this man that we don't know than we do know. And remember, Michaux wanted all the plants on this list to give as gifts to the Americans. Now, Michaux's principal job as royal botanist was to find, to collect, to grow, and then to package and ship to France large quantities of young trees and tree seeds. By his own count, he shipped 60,000 live trees, 90 cases of seeds between 1785 and 1791. That's when the royal government collapsed. He was unfortunately in America when the French Revolution occurred, and it interrupted his work. Now, this particular slide depicts a new species of oak tree that he discovered on the plantation of a then obscure Tennessee lawyer by the name of Andrew Jackson. And that Tennessee lawyer went on to become quite famous. The painting here is by Pierre J. Redoute, and it's from Francois-André Michaux's book. Now, his job required that Michaux travel, and travel he certainly did. This map shows you the extent of his travels throughout Eastern North America. Each different colored line represents a different year of travel. If you will notice, this is Hudson Bay right here. The lower part, the James Bay extension of Hudson Bay. So Michaux got all the way up here to the same latitude as Hudson Bay. He didn't go down the river and come back up it because it was too late in the season. St. Louis, over here, he got all the way to St. Louis. He got down into Central Florida, that's below Cape Canaveral. And he also got to the Bahamas. Really made a lot of trips. Now, this map actually has a Charleston connection I want you to know about. The map maker is a fellow named Jack Drost. And there might be some of you in the audience who remember him. He went to high school at James Island High School. Both of his parents were professors at the College of Charleston. Now, this view of the map is focused on the Carolinas, and you can see that it's like Charleston is the hub of a wheel with the spokes radiating out from Charleston for each journey. Now, there's one journey here that has an orange line. It goes up to the corner where North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia meet. I want to focus on that one journey, that's 1787. I have two reasons for focusing on this one journey. First, I think it is probably his most important journey in America. The journey was his initial adventure in the American backcountry and his first contact with Native Americans. In this case, it was the Cherokee Indians. Second, during this journey, he discovered the plant that has become almost synonymous with him. It's Shortia, the OCONEE bell. But Michaux was not the person to name it. That did not happen until decades after his death. Now, Michaux was very successful in finding new plants on this journey. It was a very successful plant hunting expedition. And I've put up as examples 4 pictures of plants that he discovered, that he named on this expedition. I'm sure that William Bartram told him to look for the flame azalea. But nonetheless, Michaux is the person who named it for science and did the description. Now, this is a map of the wilderness portion of the 1787 journey. It begins in Clemson, which is right here on this map. I hope you all can see this. He goes up to Cashers and Highlands in North Carolina, comes back through Dillard, Georgia, and returns all the way back down to Clemson, and of course, eventually to Charleston. The map maker here is Clemson professor Bob Zahner. Bob Zahner was the scholar who determined when and where Michaux actually found Shortia. And he solved a mystery first posed in 1839 by the celebrated botanist Asa Gray. Now, the wilderness portion of this journey was really hard. It pushed Michaux to his physical and mental limits. He was soaking wet, bone weary, and hungry most of the time. And then something really bad happened, really bad. His Indian guides, his Cherokee guides, got them lost in this trackless wilderness. This is an area that is still a wilderness today. Michaux felt fear. He wrote about it, but he overcame it. And he showed that determination and persistence that would be his hallmark. And he learned from this journey. He became an intrepid explorer of the American wilderness. In the 20th century, the common name OCONEE bell came into general use for Shortia. It's an evergreen ground cover with delicate white flowers. It grows in a very small native range in South Carolina's upstate and in North Carolina, but it has been successfully planted as far north as Massachusetts. Recently, I understand, on Asa Gray's grave. Now here's a quick overview of the story. Harvard botanist Asa Gray is studying Michaux's herbarium in Paris in 1839 when he found a single herbarium specimen. That is a dried plant, pressed flat. He found a dried herbarium specimen of the plant. It was in a folder marked Unknown Plants in Michaux's herbarium. This little plant just positively captivated him. He persuaded the French to allow him to name it. And to give him a little leaf that he could take back to Harvard with him. So Gray named it for a friend, Charles Short. He was thinking that since Short lived in Kentucky, he would probably make a trip over to the southern Appalachians in the Carolinas and find the plant. But Short disappointed him. Short did not even look. So Gray, who became the Dean of American Botany, he came south to the southern Appalachians himself, and he searched for the plant. He didn't find it. He came back again a couple of years later. He didn't find it again. And then by this time, he's sort of becoming the most important American botanist. So he persuades other people to come south and look for it. But none of them found it. So it became known as the lost Shortia. And a lot of botanists laughed. They thought that it really didn't exist. But decades later, a very tiny population was discovered along the upper Catawba River in North Carolina. And then a few years after that, acres and acres of it were found in the Jocassee Valley near the headwaters of the Kiowa River in South Carolina. Until then, nobody had seen the flowers. Now, Charles Sargent, who was the director of the Arnold Arboretum, was the man who rediscovered it in South Carolina, and he promptly found a passage in Michaux's journal that seemed to fit this plant. And in the late 1880s, Sargent declared that Michaux had discovered it in the winter of 1788. Now, Sargent's report about the winter of 1788 discovery inspired absolutely romantic stories in books and magazines. For several decades, actually. The very first one that I found is this one from June of 1922. But then in the 1970s, that professor at Clemson, Bob Zahner, studied Michaux's journal very, very carefully. And he determined that Michaux had actually discovered Shortia in the Jocassee Valley in June of 1787. And until Zahner's study, published in 1983, absolutely everybody had believed that Michaux discovered it in December of 1788. Now you can still see Shortia growing wild on trails in the Jocassee area, but now the valley where Michaux walked is a hydroelectric lake. Around the same time that Bob Zahner was working out where Michaux found Shortia, and Duke Energy was flooding the valley to create Lake Jocassee, the Shortia story took another new twist in France. And the catalyst was a French-speaking gardener from Charleston, South Carolina. In March of 1974, Charleston gardener Lucile Maclennan, she was a French teacher when she was working, visited Michaux's herbarium in Paris, where, after looking for the great Shortia specimen studied by Asa Gray, she reported to the curators that it was missing. So now what we have is that the celebrated lone specimen of the lost Shortia is itself lost. Of course, the French searched for it, but it was really lost. And so they made a dossier of their efforts, meaning a file. Now, if Lucile's photo here looks familiar to you, you may have seen a story in the Post and Courier in July, a Post and Courier story about Lucile's 100th birthday. She's a living treasure. She's a link to all sorts of wonderful stories about plants, about Michaux. Lucile's fifth great-grandfather, Colonel Daniel Gaines, was a Revolutionary War soldier who served at Yorktown with Lafayette. And on the 29th of November, 1788, yes indeed, Colonel Gaines hosted Andre Michaux for the night. Now, Lucile's role in the Shortia story is documented in that same dossier at the Herbarium that I mentioned earlier. I've underlined Madame Murdoch Maclennan from South Carolina for you in this letter noting her role. So all that remains of Gray's famous specimen is the single leaf he took back to Harvard. But now there's another twist to this story. You know, Shortia is just not a plant who gives up all its secrets at once. It turns out that Michaux collected more than one Shortia specimen in June of 1787. But nobody had any idea of that until Régis, Pluchet, and I visited the Michaux Herbarium in Paris together in 2004. Our visit put in motion a staff search that led to its discovery the very day after our visit. It was incorrectly labeled, and it was in the herbarium of one of his colleagues, Anton Laurent de Jésus. Absolutely nobody knew about a second specimen, certainly not Asa Gray, because it wasn't even donated to that herbarium until 18 years after Gray visited. And of course, it was incorrectly labeled. Now, Eliane Norman made a solo visit to the herbarium after Régis and I, and she's also involved in a big way. She spotted the specimen before Régis had even been notified. Elaine got to draft the professional paper announcing its discovery to the botanical community. I mentioned that Bob Zahner determined that Michaux found Shortia in Jocassee. Here he is explaining that discovery to the South Carolina State Park's naturalist in the area, Tim Lee. Tim leads the public on Shortia hikes at Devil's Fork State Park at Lake Jocassee each March. And he certainly tells everybody that it was discovered in 1787. Now, in fact, Shortia has its own annual festival held in March when the plants are in full bloom. It's called Bell Fest. Now I want to finish by talking about gardens. Look how things at Versailles have changed since Louis XIV's time. Wow, there is a city out there next to Versailles. But of course, what I'm focused on is this garden. I mean, the French really spent a lot of money on gardens, especially this one. Now, this is the entrance to the Jardin des Plantes, also known in Michaux's day as the King's Garden or the Jardin du Roi. It combined the functions of a museum, a university for science studies, and a botanical garden. Now, remember that bur oak that Michaux discovered at Andrew Jackson's first plantation in Tennessee? You're looking at one right here. It's right behind the garden gate. And this is a tree that Francois-André Michaux, the son, planted here in 1811. Now, Michaux had both northern and southern gardens in the United States. These were part of that network of worldwide gardens that the French had. These were working plant nurseries. They were not formal gardens. And unfortunately, neither one remains a garden today. Now, most of the land for his New Jersey garden was sold to develop a cemetery in the mid-19th century. This is truly a lost garden. There are lots of markers by these permanent plantings, if you will. Allow me a little humor. But there is no marker telling anyone who might want to know that this was the site of André Michaux's first garden in America. Today, there is one history professor at Keene University, and she's the only person I know in New Jersey who has any interest in Michaux. But she's actively teaching, so we can hope that if she inspires a few students, that will change. There is a bright spot about the New Jersey garden, however. In the 1940s and 1950s, the director of the New York Botanical Garden, who was also a professor at Columbia University, studied the documents related to it, and he produced a thorough professional paper about it. His paper is longer and goes into more detail than many books. So while the ground it sat on is lost, this garden story lives on, preserved in the scholarly literature. What of Charleston? In 1910, William Chambers Coker, he's a Hartsville native, and he founded the Department of Botany at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He visited the site of Michaux's Charleston garden, probably at the request of H.A.M. Smith. He discovered remnants of Michaux's occupation of that site that were at least 115 years old. And he wrote about his visit in the Journal of the Elisha Mitchell Scientific Society. So there is a report of the Charleston garden in the scholarly literature. But Coker wrote only of his visit. He could not examine the documents about the garden, as was done for the New Jersey garden. Now here's the ruin of the Charleston garden site a few years ago. It still looks much like this. But unlike in New Jersey, Michaux has not been forgotten in Charleston. You know, some people drive to the airport. Some of the land his garden occupied is now the airport. And they drive to the airport on Michaux Parkway, which is named for him. There's a state historical marker on Aviation Avenue next to the garden site. And there is a marvelous new mural at the entrance to the airport parking deck. And beneath that impressive mural is the Garden Club of Charleston's iconic 1954 granite marker. You know, that Garden Club's longtime president, Elizabeth Symington Williams, who was known as Betty, was a tireless champion of Michaux 75 years ago. So while you can't enjoy a walk in Michaux's own Charleston garden, because it was already a ruin 200 years ago, you can walk lovely gardens in Charleston where Michaux and his son themselves walked, on the paths like this lovely alley at Middleton. They may have walked on that alley. Moreover, thanks to the efforts of dedicated and well-informed garden guide trainers like Marlene Ward, pictured here wearing her trademark hat with camellia blossom in it, the garden docents who act as guides carry forward the story of Michaux for visitors to this historic property. To continue, there is also a new group formed in Charleston about 2006-2007, focused on Michaux's Charleston garden property. Now, I want to identify this very diverse group for you. Not everybody who was a member of the group is in this picture, but just to give you some idea of the diversity here. On the far left, you've got a history teacher. She had retired by then. Excuse me. Mary Jane Harris. Now, next to Mary Jane Harris is the group's spark plug and founder, the late Mary Miller. She was at that time the science librarian at the Charleston Public Library. Next to Mary, in that sort of not quite red, not quite purple shirt with the white hat, is Dee Dee Joyce, archaeologist from the College of Charleston. Next to her is the tall man wearing a hat, retired Duke University professor George Walton Williams. He is Betty Williams' son. In front of George is a visitor from Athens, Georgia, Brad Sanders, author of a book on botanist William Bartram. Now, Bartram and Michaux were contemporaries and friends. Brad is also a map maker, and he drew 3 of the 16 maps that are found in Andre Michaux in North America. Next on the right is Dr. Jeff Klein, then a Charleston pediatrician. And on the far right is Walter Dunlap, who used his skills as a surveyor to locate the garden within Michaux's larger property. Now that property, remember, was 111 acres. So there's several other members of the group who, like I said, were not present. I know some of them, Marlene Ward, Morgan McClure, and of course, Lucile Maclennan, but there are others that I don't even know. But I do know that they have partnered with the city of North Charleston and several other organizations, including the Alliance Française, to sponsor several successful projects, including the State Historical Highway marker at the garden site, that magnificent mural at the Charleston Airport, and an exchange of garden interns with the French School at Versailles. Right now, they're waiting for approval from the Air Force before their completed application to put the Michaux garden site on the National Register of Historic Places can go forward. You know, Andre Michaux really liked recognition. He didn't seek his fortune. He sought to be respected by men who were well educated, his peers. And I think he would approve very, very much of what's being done in Charleston. So thank you very much. Karen, I think I turn it back to you. How do I do that?
Thank you. That was great, Charlie. Thank you so much. I believe if you hover down at the bottom of your Zoom screen again on that, there you go. You can actually click up at the top. It should say stop sharing screen. And you can click that.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect. So we do have a couple of, well, we have one question and one comment. So I want to encourage everybody, if you've got questions, again, if you all participants, hello, hover down at the bottoms of your Zoom screens, you should be able to see an option that says Q&A with 2 little comment bubbles. And if you click on that, it should allow you to ask a question. And so, Charlie, first off, a Mr. James Maclennan, who you included in your presentation, wrote not a question, but congratulations on a wonderful presentation from Jim. So,
Well, thanks, Jim.
congratulations very much. And then Mark would like to know, how did you become interested in Michaux?
Well, I trace the earliest interest in Michaux to my years dating that woman that I married 46 years ago. We used to go to Linville Gorge from Charlotte, and this is so long ago that we did it on 2-lane roads. To go from Charlotte to Linville Gorge in 1971, 72, that era, you drove through the town of Lincolnton, where there was a historical marker that said Andre Michaux was here. And then you drove up through Morganton, North Carolina, where there's with another historical marker that said Andre Michaux slept at Swan Ponds near here. And then, of course, we went to our destination on the edge of Linville Gorge, a place called Table Rock. And there was a flower in our wildflower book called Michaux's saxifrage. And, you know, the name sort of stuck. And a couple of years later, I went to Florida State to get my master's. And lo and behold, my professor, my favorite professor, did a lecture about her own adventures researching Andre Michaux. And she actually said that she had a dream. When she was younger, a freshly minted PhD, she wanted to translate the unknown Michaux. Well, luckily for her, the dean convinced her that that would be a career killer. So I got to live her dream. But that's the beginning of the story, historical markers.
That's great, thank you. We have another comment from Debbie who says, most informative, thank you for a great presentation. And then we have one more question. Do you have a personal favorite plant that Michaux found other than the Shortia?
Yes, indeed, I do. And there is a picture of it behind me. This is not quite actual size. An actual size flower would be somewhere between 15 and 18 inches across. This is what we call the big leaf magnolia. And this is what started my career as a Michaux scholar, doing a research project on this tree that was turned into a professional paper in Castania, which was kind of incredible because I don't have a biology degree.
I love that. I love how gigantic that is. It blows my mind that you said that's not quite actual size. That's amazing. I love it.
Even bigger than that.
Sid, do we have any of those in Middleton Place?
Yes, you do. You definitely
do. You're
Sydney,
muted, Sid.
Sydney
Unmute
knows.
yourself for me.
Tell us about where they are, Sydney.
Sydney, you're muted.
Oh, Sydney's muted.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah, Karen, it's on the Azalea Hillside. I'll point it out to you next season.
Yay!
Yeah,
I'm so excited.
It's a deciduous magnolia, so it doesn't have any leaves in the winter.
Y'all, this is great news because when Sydney shows it to me, then I can take my camera and put it on Facebook Live and show it to you.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. Okay, that is so cool. All right, does anybody else have any questions? We've marked all of our questions and comments as having been answered live. So now is your last chance. Don't forget to go to that link. I apologize, the first time I actually posted it only to panelists, which is me, Charlie, and Sid, and we all know where to get the book. So I'm going to post that link one more time to everybody. So you can go and get Charlie's book. There's a copy of it right there in his view.
Of course, mine has a library cover on it, so it's reflective. You can take the librarian out of the library, but you can't take the library out of the librarian.
Fair enough. We have a couple more comments in the Q&A. Thank you, and thanks for a great presentation. So thanks, everybody. We appreciate y'all being here. Sydney, did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share this evening?
I just wanted to say thank you to Charlie. Awesome job. I really enjoyed just a wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much, and many, many thanks to our audience as well. And Karen, especially to you, you are really a gem.
Oh, this is fun. This is not work for me. This is good time. So I appreciate the opportunity.
For me, I did this when I was retired, most of it.
Yeah.
This has been a wonderful adventure. Every page of Michaux was a new research project, sometimes 4 or 5 on one page. That's why it took so long.
That is fabulous. Well, everybody, thank you so much again. Thank you for supporting Middleton Place Foundation. When you come and participate in these programs, when you donate through our website or through mail, we really appreciate it. Those are the kinds of things that allow us to supplement with grants like that from South Carolina Humanities in order to continue to bring you these programs for free. So we really appreciate y'all. It really wouldn't be possible without you all being here and attending and commenting and sharing with us. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Would love to see more webinars from Middleton Place. Thank you, William. We will make sure that that happens. Tune in the spring. There will be more webinars, lots of different topics. And just to remind everybody again, Plugged into History is back on Thursday. That's 2 days from today at 11 a.m. We'll see you on Facebook Live. And if you can't make it live, just go on to Facebook later on at your convenience. And the recording of Sid talking about fall planting will be there, ready for you to enjoy. So, and again, don't forget, not only can you get Charlie's book in our e-commerce store there, you can come to Middleton Place to pick it up. And when, not if, when Charlie comes back to give his presentation in person, make sure that you come too. You can bring your book, and he has told me that he will sign them. So he'll be wearing that tri-corner hat. He'll be signing books. So we look forward to seeing you all then. So stay tuned with us at middletonplace.org. If you are so moved, you can go to middletonplace.org/donate and help us out with these programs. And otherwise, we are on Facebook /MiddletonPlaceNHL and on Instagram with the handle @MiddletonPlace. So really, if you're searching any of those social media platforms, look for Middleton Place. You will find us. And thank you again. Sydney, thank you so much for being here, for hosting this wonderful event, and for representing Middleton Place for us. And Charlie, thank you. Amazing stuff, and you really make Michaux come alive, and we're just so grateful.
It's been fun. It's been a privilege
really
to work on
appreciate
Michaux with people like Walter Taylor and Elion Norman. You know, you only get a chance to do stuff like this once in a lifetime.
Well, we're so glad that you all did.
Both of them are stars. You know.
We are so glad that you all did. All right, everybody. Well, that's it for us. Keep an eye out on our e-blasts and on our social media and website for the next speaker series. And otherwise, we'll see you around Middleton Place. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.